What's happening? MC Marcus Chapman here. The breakdown show number 17 in the MC 25. The show was done on December 4th, 1999. It was a Saturday night, and it's called Whatever Happened to These 90s Artists. This is a show I did on WTLC Indianapolis, and here is the backstory behind it. I was in Chicago, 1999, best year of my life, having a great time, very successful professionally. I had the two hottest shows on the weekend on WGCI, Friday night 10 to 2, Operation Get Down Mix Show, which is documented in show number 25, the first show in MC 25. And then also Saturday night 6 to 10 with Dr. Love, the Hit Squad. That's show number 22, was height of the Hit Squad. And so that was all going on. My personal life was great, having a good time. And at a certain point, matter of fact, right before I did that show, that said number 25 on July 23rd of 99, Sam Silk had been the host of that Friday night show along with Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. He got hired to go to Cleveland to do afternoons. And I remember before he left, he was telling me, you're never going to get the respect that you deserve if you don't leave Chicago and end up working somewhere every day. Even though you hot right now, you got the girls, you got everything popping, but from an industry standpoint, you need to work somewhere full time. Me and him both knew that wasn't gonna happen at GCI, and so right after he told me that, I ended up getting a little note in my mailbox at the station from Elroy Smith, the program director at GCI, saying to contact Brian Wallace. He was the program director of WTLC in Indianapolis, and they had it over. Now, at that time, TLC has been around for a long time. Okay, so they had a strong adult audience, but at that time in '99, they were looking to move into a more contemporary direction like GCI. But in order to do that, they had to play more hip hop to get the younger crowd, interested in the station. So they started doing that, but like a lot of other stations, they couldn't say they were playing hip hop. Okay, like they started playing all the hottest stuff that was out from DMX and Eve and Rough Riders. I mean Jay-Z, everybody, but they couldn't say they were a hip hop station or play stuff like that too early in the day without losing the adult audience. So the 6 to 10 show was geared more towards like what GCI was doing, and they were trying to make the station like that overall. So I ended up auditioning I put an air check together with pieces of the July 30th show that I did, which I somehow don't have that whole show anymore. I wish I did. And the other side was some stuff I did with Dr. Love from the week before that, July 24th of '99. Sent that to Brian Wallace along with a resume and cover letter. We ended up talking. We set up plans for me to come out there and audition. I flew out there August the 28th of '99, which was actually August 29th, which was a Sunday. And part of that audition is actually posted on YouTube as well. And so I ended up getting hired in September of '99. And I ended up doing my first show for TLC on September 30th, which was Thursday. I got there that Monday, and then it was a few days of me learning how to run the equipment and, all of that stuff. So I did my first show September 30th. And so a few months later is the date that we get to with this show that is number 17, December the 4th. So I was doing 6 to 10 at night, Monday through Friday, but I also worked usually like 3 out of the 4 Saturdays in a month. Sometimes I only had to work 2, but so this was a Saturday. And what I came up with was an idea. We were coming to the end of the '90s, and if you remember, if you're around that time, one of the big topics was the Y2K scare that was coming up, because the year 2000 was coming up and a lot of people thought all the computers were going to shut down. It's going to be chaos. You better get you some canned goods in the house and all this. And so, but that was real though at the time. People were a little frightened as to what might happen. So the idea I came up with was something called the best of the '90s. All right. So instead of focusing on the negative stuff that could happen, I knew that the 90s had been a very important decade for black folks in America creatively, and I wanted to celebrate that. So I came up with this concept of having an award show every night on my show. I was on 6 to 10, so every night at about, I think I did about 8:30, I would introduce a new category for people to call and vote and to say what they thought the best of the 90s was. So, who was the best black comedian of the 90s? What was the best black movie, actor, actress, soundtrack, rap song, R&B song, slow jam, up tempo jam, collaboration, remix? I mean, it was all these different categories. And so that was going to go all the way to the end of the year. But before that, the Saturday before that was supposed to start, is this show right here, number 17. So what I did, I came up with an idea called Whatever Happened To, because yeah, you had all these great songs and artists and everything, and there were some major stars around, but you also had artists who had been hot earlier in the decade and they just kind of disappeared. They might have had, one or two big songs or one big album, and then their career just didn't stay at the same level that it was originally. So the idea was whatever happened to these people, and the name Whatever Happened To, I actually got that from WGCI's morning show at the time. It was Crazy How McGee morning show, and they used to do something called Whatever Happened To, but they did it as sort of a way to diss people. And I didn't really want it to be like that, but I just felt that that was a good phrase, whatever happened to, because that was something that people would really say. So that was the concept I came up with for this Saturday night show. It was just going to be this one particular night. It was going to lead into the best of the 90s, which was going to start 2 nights later that Monday. So that was the meat of the show. But I wasn't going to do it for the entire 4 hours. And one of the things that I learned in Indianapolis very early on was that people would call the station if I gave them a reason to call. They didn't just call out the blue. I mean, Chicago people would just call out of the blue to say something, ask you a question, whatever, make a comment on something they heard. And in Indianapolis, people didn't really do that. There wasn't really how a lot of the jocks had worked the phones. So I would come up with different features to get a lot of listener participation because that was my thing. I mean, I didn't want to be sitting in there just, talking to myself. I wanted to kick it with the people on the phones. And so my show was, there was a lot of phone calls. Matter of fact, that was a big deal in terms of me getting hired. I remember when the day I was going to audition, when Brian Wallace picked me up from the airport, he was driving me around the town. And I remember we were in the car for about 20 minutes, and I said, wait a minute, I just noticed I haven't heard any phone calls at all. And he just kind of sighed and said, yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why you're here. So that was something that they were looking for me to do to get the phone lines jumping, and I did. So I had different features. I had to check in, just people would call and say they part of town. I had something called the MC categories, where people would, I would be like women who are under 5'5", or people who know how to cook or whatever, and those people would call for that hour or whatever. So I noticed if I did stuff like that, people would call. So for this particular day, I guess it had been raining, and so I came up with a thing called Doing Your Thing in the Rain, which I have no recollection of whatsoever. It was just something for that day, for people to call and tell me what they had been doing in the rain. Were they out, taking care of business? Were they trying to stay inside, like reading books, watching movies, whatever they were doing? It was just a way to get people involved in the show in that first hour, because I didn't want to just be sitting there playing songs and giving out information. So that's what you hear in the first hour. But actually, let me back up, because the show starts off with something really interesting. You hear me play an artist drop from John Witherspoon, the comic and actor. And then you hear a voicemail. I had started something called the Flavor Pager. I got the name from the Bad Boys, Mike Love and the Diz. They had a Flavor Pager on their show in Chicago, but they didn't use it to put people on the air. They just would leave info about parties, and people would call the page and get the info and everything. It wasn't something where they left messages and the Bad Boys put them on the air. Rick Party had done that when he hosted 6 to 10 before them. I remember when I first started working there at GCI, I remember he had just got the pager, and people would leave messages, and he would play the messages, and you had the little voice prompts, thank you, and all this stuff, goodbye, and all that. And so I wanted to utilize the pager like that, and I think I did it more effectively than anybody that I ever heard. And so sometimes people would leave messages even when I wasn't on the air. And so this particular show, you hear a message from a guy. It starts out, you hear the voice message that I had that people would hear when they call. It's like, hey, what's up? It's MC Marcus Chapman from TLC. Mr. Flavor Pager, brought to you by Pages Plus at 912-1057. Leave your message after the tone. And the beep would come on. They would leave their message. So you hear a guy who leaves a very interesting message. He's like, what's up, dog? I ain't hating on you or nothing. And so right away, it kind of gets your attention. And he's like, who are you? Who is Marcus Chapman? I'm hearing all these people calling in and saying your name and all this stuff. And he was just kind of confused. It's kind of like he admired what he heard me doing, but he wasn't sure if he should. He wasn't sure if he should, dislike me or like me, or is it all right? It's like it was really interesting, and it was kind of funny too, because it kind of showed how a lot of times guys, radio is really geared towards women more so than anything else. So as a guy on the air, women may like you if you sound good and you're doing good. Women will start talking about you, but guys might like you too. But there's also sort of a sense of uneasiness because it's like, okay, well, this guy's getting all the attention and it's taken away from me. So it was really an interesting dynamic. So I started out with that message, and then right after that, you had different messages. That wasn't a message. That was actually a phone call where a guy says, "This MC Marcus Chapman?" Oh yeah. He's like, "Oh, you the man, dog." It's like two totally different extremes almost. So that kicks off the show, and then you hear me doing the thing about people calling in what they're doing in the rain. The second hour was something called "What You On." That was something that I created in Chicago for my overnight show, the After Set, that I did Friday night going into Saturday morning. I started that the year before in summer of '98, and there are like 3 shows in this MC25 where you hear that. And so I took it to, and then I took it to Saturday night with Dr. Love. Oddly enough, it worked better in the overnights than it did with me and Doc. I guess just because of the time. But so in this 7 o'clock hour for this show, I had people call. I called it "What You On" because that was a phrase people said in Chicago I would hear. But then I just said, what are your plans for the night? I tried to explain it a little bit more. And so you hear people calling in saying what they were going to do. Indianapolis wasn't a really big club city. So you don't hear a lot about, people calling in saying they were going to a party. I think you do hear one person say they were coming to the party that I was hosting that night, though. I had met, it was a cat from the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, Rodney Rivers, and him and his partner, Clarence. I forget Clarence's last name, but Rod had came down to the station one night, met with me about hosting some of the events, so we made an agreement, and I started hosting. I hosted several parties for them while I was in Indianapolis. I believe this one on December the 4th this was the first one that I was going to do at Butler University. So you hear me mentioning that throughout the show. One person called, said she was going to come to the party. The party was cool. It wasn't just off the hook, like, oh my God, this is the greatest party ever. It wasn't like that, but it was cool. And so you hear me say that that's what my plans were. And then after that segment, we got to the meat of the show, which was the Whatever Happened To. And so the people calling in, giving all these names, all these artists, I mean, it was really a fun segment. I mean, it was really a lot of fun. People were, I mentioned some different artists who had been hot earlier in the decade because I was trying to focus on 90s artists. Some people mentioned a few folks from the 80s, but it was really focused on 90s artists. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost a preview or foreshadowing of Unsung, because some of the artists that got mentioned were later featured on Unsung. People like High Five and H-Town and, a lot of these artists who got mentioned on this show ended up having unsung episodes, whereas others not so much because they just didn't have enough material for a whole hour-long segment. But it was really funny. And what I tried to do was to add to the entertainment was I would make different comments that were kind of based off the songs that they were known for. So, like for example, uh, would somebody call and say Moke and Steph. They had a big hit called "He's Mine" in 1995, and then we really didn't hear from them anymore. So, I was saying something about they was arguing over that man or something. It was different little comments I would make to try to tie into it. And then there were a couple of artists that got mentioned who, at the time in '99, we hadn't heard from them in a while. So they kind of qualify for whatever happened to. But then they ended up coming back. Say, like somebody mentioned Tony Braxton. Well, in 2000, Tony Braxton came out with a new album and had, a couple of big hits. He wasn't man enough for me, just be a man about it. Always something about a man. But she ended up coming back. And then somebody mentioned Jamie Foxx's singing career, which I thought was hilarious at the time because Jamie Foxx was known more so for comedy and acting. But back in like 93, 94, I believe it was 94, he did have a hit single and he had a CD out. And so people knew he could sing, but he had kind of gotten away from that. But then maybe about 5 years or so after I did this show, he started making music again. He hooked up with Clive Davis and Clive signed him and he started making some hits in the second half of the first decade of the 2000s. So, but at the time we hadn't heard him sing for a while. Most people had completely forgotten that he had even put any music out. But it was a really entertaining show. At the end, you even hear me say that I had fun that night. It might have been the most fun I ever had on the air. Those last 2 hours of this particular show. So I had to, pick this as one of the shows for the MC25. It was also interesting because it was done in what they call the Showcase Studio. At that time, WTLC it's owned by Radio One, but at that time it was owned by Emmis. And Emmis has this great facility in downtown Indianapolis on what they call Monument Circle. And they had all this state of the art equipment. They had the best equipment, probably more than any station in the country at that time, that whole facility. And so they had several different radio stations in the building. And then downstairs, because like TLC, I forget what floor it was on, maybe like the fifth floor, seventh floor, something like that. And downstairs on the main level, when you first walked into the building, they had two studios that they called the Showcase Studios, where if you were outside walking around on the circle, you could look inside and see the people who were on the air. So what they would do, they would rotate which stations were in the Showcase Studio by certain days. So TLC was in there, I think, like maybe Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday, or Tuesday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that. And so this particular night was a night that we were broadcasting in the Showcase Studio. So you hear me say that. And the thing is, if you were down there, I would go on the air and invite people to come down. I'd say, hey, if you want to stop by, say what's up. And I would let people in the studio and they'd come hang out. And sometimes I put them on the air, which you hear in this show. And, sometimes that was a little risky, but I liked interaction. So people would really come down and hang out every now and then. And it kind of gave the show a different feel. The only thing about the Showcase Studios is that they sounded really weird. For some reason, the microphone squeaked a lot when I put people on the air. When I recorded phone calls, I would be much louder than the caller. And so you hear a little bit of that. The levels are off, but there was nothing I could do about that. But it doesn't take away from how good the show was. So this is number 17 in the MC25. Whatever happened to these 90s artists, done on WTOC in Indianapolis. It's the first of 3 shows I picked from my time in Indianapolis for the MC25. And this is the first one from December 4th of 1999. So check that out. And coming up next at number 16 is a show that I did in Chicago that has a little bit more content to it. It was a little bit, I won't say controversial, but it's a really interesting show, and that's going to be coming up next at number 16. But for now, it's number 17. Whatever happened to these 90s artists? MC Marcus Chapman from WTLC Indianapolis, December 4, 1999, on a Saturday night. Check it out.